One of the most meaningful efforts I've been involved with was my advocacy work with the Family Steering Committee. And it was 12 determined family members who advocated for the creation of the establishment of the 9/11 Commission. It all began at a rally. I was asked to speak at a rally in Washington, D.C. on June 11th, 2002. And following the rally, we began meeting with congressional offices. Over the years, we held rallies, press conferences, candlelight vigils, even outside the White House, I think, when they were having their Christmas party. And we met with over 100 congressmen and 435 senators. And you heard from several of the congressmen and women yesterday. And so it's a real honor today to have 4 distinguished individuals with us who were instrumental in both legislating and the creation of the commission. On the Senate side, Senator Susan Collins and Senator Joe Lieberman. And the chair of the 9/11 Commission, Governor Tom Kean, and 9/11 Commissioner Richard Benveniste. These remarkable and dedicated individuals led by example and set the standard for working toward a shared goal in a bipartisan manner. The 9/11 Commission is now in the history books, but it did result in sweeping intelligence reform that I believe made our country safer. And this would not have happened without their collaborative effort and the coordination with their colleagues, and, like Senator John McCain, who's not with us, and then certainly Lee Hamilton, who actually Governor Kean referred to him as the co-chair. They always agreed on everything and worked together. Richard Benveniste was a 9/11 commissioner. He served as one of 10 commissioners on the Bipartisan National Commission on Terrorist Attack on the United States. In 2009, he served on a task force created by the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security to assess the National Alert System and make recommendations for improvements, and later served on the NSA Advisory Board legal panel from 2014 to 2017. From 2017 to 2019, he was a legal analyst for CNN. Richard currently practices law in Washington as a partner at Mayer Brown LLP. Senator Susan Collins is Maine's senior United States Senator, who was first elected to the Senate in 1996. She ranks 11th in the Senate seniority and the most senior Republican woman. Senator Collins has earned a national reputation for working across party lines. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, Senator Collins and Senator Joe Lieberman authored landmark legislation overhauling our nation's intelligence community, improving its effectiveness while protecting civil liberties. Known for her main work ethic, you can go into that further, Susan. Senator Collins has cast more than 7,900 consecutive votes and holds the longest perfect voting record in the history of the United States Senate. Senator Joseph Lieberman is now senior counsel at the law firm of Kasowitz, Benson, Torres, LLP in New York. Joseph Lieberman was for 24 years a member of the U.S. Senate from Connecticut, and we were very fortunate that he was senator on 9/11 and the years after. At the end of his service in January 2013, he was chairman of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee and a senior member of the Armed Services Committee. Through both committee positions, he became a leader in protecting the security of the American public and supporting American international leadership. Senator Lieberman is known as a national leader who works across party lines to get things done, and he did that so eloquently with Senator Collins. Governor Tom Kean, chairman of the 9/11 Commission and former governor of the state of New Jersey, on December 16, 2002, Tom Kean was named by President George Bush to head the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States. The commission's work culminated on July 22, 2004, with a release of the 9/11 Commission report, which has quickly become a national bestseller. Its recommendations resulted in the largest intelligence reform in our nation's history. Governor Kean served as the chairman of the 9/11 Public Discourse Project, a nonprofit entity created with private funds to continue the Commission's work of guarding against future attacks. He delivered the keynote address at the 1988 Republican National Convention. Governor Kean currently serves as chairman of the board of Carnegie Corporation of New York. And I'd like to welcome, these wonderful individuals here with us today, and also welcome to Mike, who moderated several panels. Mike Kelly is with the New Jersey Bergen News and USA Today. He has, I think we met when you were following the 9/11 Commission a few years ago. So I want to welcome everyone and turn it over to you, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you, Mary. I really appreciate this, and what a superb panel we have. It's too bad we have only an hour. One of the themes that we are going to address, which emerged yesterday, is bipartisanship. So deliberately, we are seeing Democrat, Republican here, which may be a major shock to our country these days. But before we get into the politics and the policy of what the 9/11 Commission meant, let's start with the personal. Where were you on 9/11? How did you hear the news? What did you think? Richard, can we start with you?
Well, I was at home in Washington. Our young child was at school, at public school in D.C., and we were watching the news and saw the first plane hit and clearly recognized that this was terrorism. And my wife Donna, who's here, and I were very concerned about whether other attacks would happen and what to do about our child in school. Quite frankly, our initial reaction was parochial and family. What is going on, and how can we protect our young daughter in the face of this?
Governor?
Well, I'd had a dental procedure the day before, and I was holding my jaw. I didn't sleep very well. And the phone rang, and it was the dentist who said, "I just want to check on you and find out how you're doing." And he said, "By the way, turn on the television. There's something happening at the World Trade Center." And of course, the first plane had hit, and I turned on the television and saw the second plane hit, which, as everybody we knew then. And my immediate concern was I was the university president at that point, and I was president of a university within a few miles of New York City. So my thought was, I've probably got students who have parents or relatives who have been in that building. So I drove as fast as I could to the campus and said I wanted to meet with all the students in the largest space we had. Phones didn't work that day, as some of you remember. And so I had to send individual messages, each of the residence hall, to get the students together. And then we worked with grief counselors and with chaplains and all of that. And we went on. Interestingly enough, the wonderful reaction of the students was not even worrying about themselves or their families. They all wanted to know what they could do.
Wow.
They wanted to organize people to go to the site and see if they could help, because they couldn't, but that's what they wanted to do.
Senator Lieberman?
Thanks. Actually, to say the obvious first, it is amazing that it was 20 years ago.
I know.
Because as I hear these stories and say what I'm about to say, it feels very close. So in the nature of the Senate, our congressional life, often there are breakfasts one stops at on the way. For some reason, that morning, 9/11/01, I had 3 breakfasts. And wow, I didn't eat at all of them. So I went into the first, and when I came out, the young man from my office said, I had the radio on, he said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. So I had been interested, frankly, since Chris Shays, my dear friend and former colleague, is here. I was elected in 1988 to the Senate. Before I took office, the Pan Am plane over Lockerbie was shot down. There were a bunch of our constituents who were on that plane. So I had spent a lot of time in the years between 89 when I got there and 2001 on terrorism and counterterrorism. But I must admit, my first reaction was fear and also a sort of maybe a kind of avoidance and hopefulness. Oh, I hope, just as was said on the first panel, I hope that was just some private pilot who got lost. It happens occasionally. Went into the second breakfast, came out, and my staff, my guy said to me, oh, another plane hit the other trade center. I said, oh my God, this is a massive terrorist attack. Unbelievable. So I don't even know what the third breakfast was. Went to the office. Incidentally, the office was chaotic. The whole Capitol was chaotic. We were simply not prepared for what happened. We didn't even know where to go. I told my staff, Susan and I have talked about this a lot, go home, or if you're nearby. I went down and spoke to a Capitol policeman in the garage under the Hart Senate building, and I said, what are we supposed to do? So he said, I don't know. He called headquarters. They say, come over to the Capitol Police headquarters. There's a safe room there, and that's where we spent most of the day. It was a harrowing day, and it was in our lives a day like Pearl Harbor was in the lives of a previous generation.
Senator Collins, how about you?
I too was at home at my Washington townhouse, and I had the television on and heard the Today Show broadcasters say that a plane had struck the World Trade Center, but they were speculating that it was a commercial aircraft.
An accident.
An accident.
Yeah.
I then left. I, at that point, lived very close to the office and walked to the office, turned on the television, and the second plane had just struck. And it was then I knew that this was no bizarre commercial accident. This was an act of terrorism. I told my staff to stay away from the Capitol because I feared the Capitol was going to be the next target.
And you were right.
And and thank God for those brave people in Pennsylvania.
Sure.
And I had staffers who were on a plane returning from Maine who were at the airport at the same time as 2 of the terrorists who started their journey of death and destruction from Portland. And theirs was one of the last planes to land, and they saw the smoke billowing out of the Pentagon. And I went home passing armed guards in front of the Supreme Court, and I was so worried about the people in New York. I was also convinced there were going to be other attacks. And as Joe said, there wasn't much guidance about what to do, and we ended up going to the Capitol Police Station to get further updates.
Wow. Wow. I think people don't realize that even though these are public servants, they also lead personal lives. So that's why I deliberately began this way, as I did yesterday with our other panel. We're going to divide this up into 3 sections. First, I want to get into the early stages of pulling together the legislation to form the 9/11 Commission. Then I want to talk about the commission's work itself, and then I want you all to come back and talk about the reforms. But let's begin with Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins. Where did you come up with the idea to have a commission? How did you put the sausage together, so to speak?
So I'll begin. So this started, to the best of my knowledge, in the green room at the NBC studios on Nebraska Avenue in Washington.
Really?
One Sunday morning, John McCain and I were going to go on Meet the Press with Tim Russert. And we were having coffee and whatever, and started to talk about the reaction to 9/11 and about the fact that various congressional committees had begun to assert their jurisdiction over an investigation of what was going to happen. The Bush administration said it wanted to do it, and John and I had exactly the same reaction. This is going to turn into a turf war of an investigation. It's going to be partisan. It's going to be offensive and defensive. This is not the way it should happen for something like 9/11. And I think, I don't know for sure, that we remember that an earlier national crises, I mean, the one I mentioned, Pearl Harbor, there was a nonpartisan commission that investigated. Its report didn't come out until after the war, as I
Right.
recall, but it led to the massive reorganization reform of our national security apparatus in 1947, which was both a reaction to Pearl Harbor and also getting ready, better prepared for the Cold War, which had just begun. And of course, in my lifetime, the catastrophic assassination of President Kennedy led to the Kennedy Commission, et cetera. So John and I said, we need a nonpartisan, independent commission. Get it away from Congress, get it away from the administration. So we talked to Susan, I think we talked to Evan Bayh, maybe Bob Kerrey, others, and we introduced it, and they were very supportive. We introduced it in December of 2001. And this is a story to be told. I don't want to go on too long about it, but it didn't move smoothly. Interesting.
Oh, I know.
And I want to say to Mary, Frank, et cetera, it simply would not have passed. There never would have been a 9/11 commission without the families, because they brought it home. I mean, just very briefly, the Bush administration resisted it, and Congress did too. Congress wanted to do it, And I later read a book by a guy named Mike Allen who worked in the Bush White House, and it confirmed all my suspicions, which was a bunch of House Republican leaders convinced President Bush and the people around him that this commission that we had introduced was going to blame 9/11 on President Bush.
Well, sure. That's a natural extension of politics. Let's be honest with each other. But you guys managed to find a way around it. How did you do this?
Well, it wasn't easy. Joe and John did come up with the concept, and I completely agreed that even though we had this wave of patriotism and unity that had swept over our country, it didn't transcend the turf battles in Washington, D.C. and the fear.
I'm shocked.
Yeah. and I have to say, we see echoes of that today also,
I think
obviously.
so, yeah.
It's way worse today. But it was so important because we needed an independent, outside, no holes barred investigation to find out how could this have happened?
Right.
Why weren't the dots connected? And what could we do to help ensure it would not happen again? And the only way that would be achieved is having an independent commission headed by Tom and by Lee, who would take a nonpartisan approach. It wasn't a bipartisan approach, it was a nonpartisan approach.
Interesting. Right. Well, Governor, that leads me to you. You get the call. Of course, you were replacing Henry Kissinger, correct? Who had to drop out for all kinds of other reasons. You get the call. What did you think? Did you think this is like being told to fall on that grenade or something, or what?
No, I thought bale of hay had dropped in my head. I mean,
Really?
I'd refused, to be honest with you, I'd refused a number of calls to go to Washington in various
I know,
roles,
I know.
including two presidents asked me to serve in the cabinet at one point or other. I want to stay in New Jersey. So I wasn't planning to do anything nationally. But when this kind of event happens and the President of the United States calls you, you say yes. There's no other answer. And so I said yes, but then I figured, what have I gotten myself into? And it was difficult. As I met first a number of the families who were still obviously emotional at that point and everything else and very concerned. Then I went to Washington to try and get to know some of my fellow commissioners who we didn't know each other at all. Some of us had met each other, but that's all. So we're basically, in most cases, strangers coming together for the first time to try and get some sort of way to work with each other. And my strong conviction was that unless we could have a nonpartisan approach, it was not going to work.
Right. Tell us about that first meeting. I mean, I've written about this. You've talked to me about it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
That first meeting, what you decided to do, because I think it's really instructive for our country today.
Well, we had a couple of things. One is, I think when I first walked into the room, I think you Democrats were all sitting in one corner, Republicans were all sitting in the other, because you knew each other, there's something in common. And we started a meeting, and I said, look, no Republican is going to sit next to another Republican, and no Democrat's going to sit next to to a Democrat. We're going to sit like Noah's Ark, 2 by 2. And
So Democrat, Republican, Democrat.
yes,
Yeah,
yes,
gotcha.
and we kept that path all the way through our public hearings, our private meetings, everything else. So we were always sitting next to somebody from the other party. And I told Lee the first time he and I ever met together, I said, Lee, I'm not going to make any major decision involving this commission unless you agree. It's just not going to happen. And I didn't know at the time, because I thought that was just a normal way to go. I wasn't from Washington, But Lee said, I'm from Congress. And he said, when you said that to me, I couldn't believe it, because in Congress, the chairman is everything, and the vice chairman is nothing. So when you said that to me, I shook my head. I didn't believe it. But we proceeded that way, and I consulted Lee in every single appointment to the staff, every major decision, and I think, and it was unusual. And I think when we started out, I suspect other members of the commission sort of wondered who this strange guy from New Jersey was, and was this all really going to work? I mean, I know after the first meeting, I was headed for the hotel, and this guy says, I want to drive you. And I thought, well, he wants to find out something about me. So I accepted, and that was a
What
beginning.
did you want to find out, Richard?
Well, I wanted to get to know the man who was the chairman.
Sure.
And we had several interactions, and I would trust this guy with my life after we got to know each other. But let me say first, to pick up on something Mary said, on the day that we released our final report, what sticks in my mind is a comment by Carol Ashley, who was one of the stalwart members of the victims group, the families group, who said to me, who could have imagined when we began this that we would come this far? And I said to her, that was because you didn't realize what you were trying to do was impossible. And it is true. There would have been no commission without the members of the victims' families group, Mary and Frank and Beverly Eckert and Kristen Bertweiser and her Jersey girls and many, many, many more, who pounded on doors, who transformed their personal grief and anger into action and made it happen, because responsibility, accountability, that's anathema to many in Washington who hold public office.
Or there is a distance, a natural distance sometimes. But let's
a
pick up on
distance.
that a second, because I think it's interesting that, when we think in civics class, citizens petition their government for action, and then the government takes action. This sort of was a bit of a lesson in that, was it not?
Yeah, I want to tell a quick story which highlights the role of the families. So we introduced the commission bill in December of '01. We're now heading into the spring, and it's
Of 02,
blocked.
yeah.
'02, and it's blocked. Nothing's happening. So with the families and our colleagues in the House and Senate, Chris Shays, Tim Romer, we decided we'd hold a rally on the lawn outside the Capitol. And that's the one that Mary spoke at. And afterward, I was able to convince Nick Callio, who we were really, who was the President Bush's chief of congressional relations, to come over and meet with a representative group of leaders of Republicans and Democrats who supported the commission and families. And frankly, it was one of those, somebody once said to me, a mumbo-jumbo meeting from Nick. Poor guy, he had a mission. The White House was still resistant to this idea. And at one point, it might have been Beverly Eckert, stood up and made a very personal appeal to Nick and through him to the president. And frankly, closed in tears. The room there were probably 25 people in my conference room, silent, turned to Nick. He closes up the folder in front of him from what she had been reading, and he said, I hear you, and I'm going back to report to the president. And two things happened. Incidentally, Nancy Pelosi had come across with Tim Romer from the House to that meeting. They went back, and pretty soon after they put it up, they were the first in the House to give him credit. See how when I was a senator, I would never give the House credit, but now that this is history, and
Now that you're wise.
they actually moved it before we did, and then I think the president just decided, notwithstanding all this suspicion that people are giving me from the Hill, how can I oppose this? And really, it was the families that made it happen.
Do you think this would have come off without the family?
No
No.
way. No way. Simply wouldn't have done it. I just want to say, we'll come back to it. Listening to Tom and Richard, the commission ultimately realized our vision, our hopes, way beyond what we hoped for. And incidentally, the fears that people had put into President Bush's mind about it being partisan were just ridiculous when you looked at their report. It was totally, as has been said, nonpartisan.
Now, Senator Collins, you as a Republican, what pressure were you feeling from the party, and at the same time you're wanting to do a bipartisan or nonpartisan effort here? What were you feeling any pressure from the party, or how did you handle that?
Not a great deal. The Bush administration, as Joe has said, originally did not want a commission.
Right.
But there were a lot of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that did not want a commission that they could not control.
Right.
They wanted to keep control. And
Now, explain what that means. I think ordinary folks don't understand in the guts of politics and in particular Congress. What does that mean?
there was fear that there would be blame placed on policies or a failure to act by either congressional committees or the administration. And indeed, the commission found that the siloing of the intelligence community led to a failure of imagination, that famous phrase, and a failure to connect the dots. But those committees that had jurisdiction over those agencies were fearful that they might be blamed.
Right.
The administration was fearful that it might be blamed.
Sure.
This was about getting to the truth of what happened and how it happened and how we could prevent it. And having an outside independent commission, which I agree never would have come about but for the families, help get away from those political anxieties and the fear of being blamed.
Sure.
And instead do exactly what we wanted, an in-depth, comprehensive analysis of what went wrong and what we could do for reforms.
Governor, go ahead, I'm
this-
sorry.
The Bush administration was so worried. After I was appointed, they had me down to the White House and to sort of brief me on what they wanted, I guess. And they and they had a guy they'd picked as chairman, and not as chairman, as head of the staff. Very nice guy, had been a general. I talked to him for
Be
a
the
while.
head of your staff.
Yes.
Yeah.
For the 9/11 Commission, and he would have been acceptable probably because he was nonpartisan and he was this and that, but he wasn't the right guy for the job. And I said no. And then they wanted briefings on a regular basis and what we were doing and where we were going. And I sort of
Sure.
said no to that too.
Why did you say no?
Because I didn't see how we could proceed that way. I mean, if you really dedicated to a nonpartisan job, you can't brief one side every day. As
But
to
I
what you're
remember,
doing.
I
Take their
remember this
advice.
because I wrote about it at the time. There was a delicate road you're walking
Yes.
here. On one hand, you want this commission to go ahead and without a massive fight to go on, but at this, you want to be pragmatic about it. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that this is credible and you're doing
Yes,
your own thing.
and I knew we were going to need the White House support, because
Yes.
when if you're going to get all these documents, they don't just flow to you. They can slow walk you, and
Right.
they come, but they come a year too late or whatever, and we were always concerned about that.
And there's also the issue of money too. If you want to get some money
Yeah,
to pay the staff. et
Hey,
cetera.
that, again, hey, this is the families. I mean, the families were so part of everything. But we didn't have enough money, close to enough money to do the job that we were asked to do. And people in Congress who didn't want the commission at all were willing to stop us with the money.
Yeah.
And the families came and lobbied and helped and worked to get us some money.
Well, let me
And
reveal
then, by the
something
way, we
here.
didn't have enough
You told
time.
me once that whenever you needed something done, and you needed to pull that last lever, you called the families. Is that-
Absolutely, yeah, and absolutely. And
We
they
did
responded.
too.
We did too.
When
And-
it came to the 2004
Yeah,
reforms,
exactly.
implementing,
Right.
it was the families
Yeah.
who testified, came to the rescue, lobbied, advocated.
Well, the wise and chattering class of Washington assumed that even after it was created, that the commission would dissolve into a partisan food fight and nothing would be accomplished. And it was the leadership of Tom and Lee and the individuals on the commission who decided that the task in front of us, the duty we had sworn to undertake, was transformative, that we would put aside our partisan impulses, and we all had them, and we would put country ahead of party. And we would do our job, and our job was to find the facts, to have an honest, transparent, and credible investigation, after which we would make recommendations based on facts that we found. And to say again that the families were critical to the creation of the commission, it overcame the substantial resistance against accountability that produced those headwinds
Sure.
that we've talked
Yeah.
about. And they remained a kinetic force all the while we operated. Not only to remind us of the importance of our mission, which was critical to us, the loss of lives and the question that Americans wanted answered. How could this have happened? How could this group of lightly funded foreigners from places no one could find on a map attack us in this way and create such devastation? And we set about to answer that. And in order to have our recommendations be credible, we had to be transparent. We had to show the public that we were prepared to ask hard questions of the highest officials in the land and listen to their answers and demand follow-ups when they weren't giving us answers. And then, based on a factual record, make recommendations to make us safer.
Did it help that when we're talking about, and I hate to use the word blame, but accountability, that you not only had a Republican administration, the Bush administration, but let's be honest, the Clinton administration kind of turned a blind eye to Al-Qaeda for a number of years. Did it help that we had a Democrat and a Republican administration that had to be examined here, Governor?
Yeah, I think probably. And I guess we interviewed both presidents.
You did.
After a bit of controversy whether we were going to be able to interview the one that was in office.
Just a bit.
Yeah.
We're gonna get to that.
Yeah, but it was yes, it helped a lot. And again, I can't emphasize enough the fact, I say we didn't know each other, families didn't know us. And to start with, a number of you weren't sure they trusted us. Sure. And so I was the only one who lived in the area of New York where the greatest devastation had been. So I was very, my job was college president right outside of New York. So it was very easy to get to. So I don't know how many times I met with families. In some cases, general meetings, in some cases, the students, there's people yelling outside the door. But they held our feet to the fire.
Well, let me ask you, what did that do? How did that change you in your perspective, or did it?
Well, it changed in this sense. I mean, you knew intellectually the terrible things the family's been through. Mm-hmm. That was apparent. But emotionally, to meet with the families again and again, to hear their anguish again and again, transformed me in many ways. I mean, because when I went into those meetings, having had those meetings with the families, almost in the first 6 months of the commission, I met with the families or some members of the families, I think, every couple of weeks at least. And, it transforms the way you look at the world and the way you look at that terrible event, to spend that much time with family members. And so, yes, it was.
And they were at
It
every
made it
hearing.
personal. Yeah.
They were at every hearing.
Yep.
They were a constant source of support and rededication for us. So I can't emphasize enough how important the families were, and the example of this committed group in a democracy requiring that their voices be heard. And they prevailed in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a family
Senator
member.
Lieberman,
We had a family
sorry,
member on
go ahead.
staff, by the way, as at the request of the families.
I'm sorry,
There was
Governor.
a staff member, one of our staff members, who was from the families, and
Why did you decide to do that?
well, first of all, the families requested it, and it was a question we talked about in the commission, because some of the commissioners said, well, can you put one family member? There are different groups of families. They don't all agree with each other.
Right.
Can you put one family member on? So we did. We put one family member on, but a family member who'd been involved with the families but wasn't sort of a leader at the time of the groups, but somebody be a liaison and talk with the families, because we thought, their voice was vital, and that had to be in there and in the workings of the staff, not just outwardly with the commissioners. And by the way, not only in the beginning and through the process, the families were dogged, and they kept on with it. I mean, they kept on with it in order to help get the bill through. They testified again and again. They attended every public hearing. They lobbied individual congressmen. And then the recommendations after the main bill had been passed to get some of those other recommendations through. They testified again. They came back. I testified, I think, 16 times, 17 times maybe, before different congressional committees on the various hearings, and Lee did equal makings. You did some, everybody did some. I never was at a hearing from that day to now, there wasn't at least some family member there to support us.
Really?
And it was incredible.
Senator, I cut you off.
No, not at all. Just to say perhaps what's obvious, but the power of a couple of things about the families, Mary, Frank, and everybody else. This happens, 9/11, and naturally we're members of Congress, and we start to think about, I mean, the overall goal, after you get over the partisan anxiety and all the rest, well, this was terrible. We were vulnerable. How did we let that happen? And how are we going to stop it as best we can from ever happening again? So we started to think at the level of national security, defense, et cetera, and this new threat of Islamist terrorism. But the families made it personal. I mean, they probably spoke to every member of Congress. They impacted the administration. And talk about making sure it doesn't happen again. Here are people who had the just unbelievable, terrible loss of a loved one.
Right.
And they were speaking to it and saying, please, and sometimes explicitly, this is not about partisanship. This is not about guilt or blame. This is about how are we going to stop this from happening again. And so the other part is what Richard said a moment ago. It's a very inspiring story because it does say, in the end, with all the special interest and all the partisanship, if just citizens get agitated, involved, and they're persistent, honestly, they're the most powerful force in Congress to affect their government. And I don't know, my 24 years of service, there was not a better example of that, and I pray that we shall see it again soon in Washington, not for a tragedy like this, but for something more affirmative.
But that's something our kids ought to study.
Yeah.
Because you all know, I'm a history teacher by training before I did anything else. And I don't think there's a better example in American history of a group of citizens taking an event that was so personal and so tragic to them and turning it into a triumph, and making their government react, and making their government act in a positive way. And that should be a textbook. I mean, that should be what kids should learn. In this time of cynicism, and a time when people really don't have much confidence in their government, people ought to read this story and understand that when citizens take it into their hands to really move government, they can do it.
Yep.
So
They can
Senator
do it
Collins,
successfully.
you're
Talk about your recommendations before.
Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
We will. Senator Collins, I just had one thing for you. You're kind of the last woman standing. You're still in the Senate. How is the atmosphere different today? Why can't this kind of thing happen?
Well, first I want to add just one answer to what you said, and that is you asked how did it change us? Mm-hmm. I felt I could not let the families down. Wow. I felt this personal responsibility to get this done, and I think we all felt that way. It wasn't theoretical. It was this personal obligation. And we do need to rekindle that sense of accomplishment, of unity, of civility once again in Washington. I've been there 25 years, and believe me, it's not gotten better. It's been so wonderful to see my dear friend Joe Lieberman. I so wish he were still there, because working together, we were able to accomplish so much. Right. And to me, this starts in families and in communities. The polarization in Washington reflects the polarization in our country. Interesting. And we've got to learn that the person who disagrees with you is not your mortal enemy. We've got to learn to listen to one another again. And
Before we get into, I want to leave some time to talk about the reforms and how that worked its way through. Just a couple of questions about the commission process itself. Why was the Bush interview so difficult to pull off? You pulled it off, but why was it difficult?
Because the Bush the presidency, acting on precedent, said no president had ever been interviewed by any outside commission except on a matter of criminal fact. And they thought they were going to set some kind of a precedent.
Right.
For instance, Lyndon Johnson was never called in the Kennedy investigation, even though you'd think he would have been. He never was. And so they were worried, I guess, about setting a precedent that would affect future presidents. And that's where they were coming from.
They had
Richard, as a prosecutor, what did you think of that logic?
it was not sufficient to overcome the demand for facts and accountability. And it was both the president and the vice president who delayed, refused to cooperate. And then by publicizing the fact that, for example, President Clinton had already agreed to meet with us and answer all of our questions, which he did. And I think he was there until he was probably the guy who turned the lights off in the room. He was there as long as we wanted. And we made it known that we were expecting that the president, who had a great deal of information to impart to us, should be required to cooperate with this commission, which, after all, he was ultimately responsible for signing off on.
Governor, how did
And
you get him to do
authorizing.
it? What was the final?
Well, I kept telling him, it's to your interest.
Really?
It really is to your interest, because, there are all sorts of rumors around. People, a number of members of the families suspected that the president had gotten a presidential daily briefing that said possibly planes are going to fly into buildings.
Right.
And some people really believed that, and that Bush had ignored that information. That kind of thing, and there were other rumors like that. It was all untrue. So it was to his interest to do it. But I don't think I persuaded him. I think finally the wave of public opinion and press interest and everything else.
Mike, I might add that there's a very good summary of the interviews that we did of the presidents, both Clinton and President Bush and Vice President Cheney. And no Freedom of Information Act request has ever been submitted and acted on to make that material public, and they should.
Yeah.
It's bizarre that that interview has never been publicly revealed, and it should be. There's no reason why it
no
should
reason
be.
that should be. It's just typical of
And President Bush told us what he knew, and he also told us what he didn't know, which was a lot.
And interestingly enough, President Bush wasn't our most articulate president. And
You think?
yeah, and
Oh, I don't know.
Lee and I were a little worried about the interview, not from the point of view of anything honest or anything like that, but just how he would present himself. And so, and I remember Lee said, I talked to the Democrats, and after Clinton testified, the whole commission said he did very well. And Lee said, he said to you, I don't care how he is, you're going to leave that room and say he did very well. And so we went to the meeting with that kind of a mindset. He was terrific. He was articulate. He knew the subject. We thought he'd turn to Cheney from time to time as the more articulate person. He didn't really. He didn't turn once to Cheney, and said all the questions directly that he knew the answer to, and said when he didn't. And as we were leaving, Tim Romer whispered in my ear, he said, God, I hope he isn't that way when he runs again for office.
Interesting. Wow.
Because he was that good.
We have about 20 minutes left, and I want to leave some room at the end for all of you to sum up. But let's talk about the reforms. Let me start with you, Senator. So the commission does its work, presents the book comes out, it's the summer of 2004. We're right in the middle of an election campaign. Now we got to get to the reforms. What did you do?
So it was really interesting when the report came out in July of 2004, because there were numerous committees in the Senate jockeying to get jurisdiction over the legislation. And the Armed Services Committee made a case, the Intelligence Committee, Foreign Relations, Judiciary, I mean, just you name it. And the two leaders who talked back then, Senator Frist and Senator Daschle, had a conversation, and they decided it should be referred to what was then known as the Governmental Affairs Committee, which Joe and I headed. And because they knew that we would take the same kind of nonpartisan approach that the commission had taken. And they felt we were the one committee who could get it through. So I will always remember Bill Frist calling me up and saying, we've had a discussion and only you and Joe can do this.
Only you and Joe.
Right.
It's like, yeah.
And
How did you feel at that moment?
well, you felt the weight of the responsibility, but I was really happy to have that responsibility because I knew we could do it.
Yeah, no, I had the same reaction. And we, Susan just said something that you wouldn't hear on Capitol Hill today. Maybe you didn't hear it that much. She said the committee, which Joe and I headed.
Interesting.
And that's what I would always say. The committee, which Susan and I headed. So sometimes when the Republicans were in the majority, she was chair, Democrats, I was chair, but really we were co-chairs. And just as you and Lee were. And it was a great, I thought, I was honored when Tom Daschle called me, had the same conversation, and I felt, really, this is an incredible opportunity for us to do something for our country. Susan and I had a great relationship, just trusting, total transparency. And you know what, I think we discovered over time that we just had similar attitudes to the job. We wanted to get something done, and we knew that you only got something done if you worked across party lines and you were willing to negotiate and compromise. In a Democratic legislature like ours, you can't, small d, you simply can't get 100% of what you want. So the one thing Daschle said to me, and I'm sure Bill Frist said, because he said, just consult with the other committee leaders of the other committees so they feel involved, and we did. And because Frist and Daschle felt this happened, this attack on 9/11/01, it was now 2004.
Yeah.
And they wanted this done that year, and so did the president. It didn't actually get done until after the election, but we made a lot of progress on it. We'll get to this, but I just want to say briefly, and I'm glad to talk more, the legislative consideration of the commission report was absolutely bipartisan or nonpartisan. We had some tremendous fights, but they were about turf.
Right.
And, Don Rumsfeld was a friend of mine. I had great respect for him. He was our biggest problem, because you will be surprised to hear that he did not want the intelligence assets of the Defense Department to come under this Director of National Intelligence.
I remember this, yeah.
Oh, man, and he got Duncan Hunter, who was the House Chair of Armed Services, who was a tiger and maybe a bully sometimes. So we had tremendous battles, but they were not partisan. And it went from the way it was adopted, the commission because of the families, to the way the commission acted nonpartisan, and it was totally nonpartisan in Congress.
Go
So
ahead.
in addition to the split in the Senate, we had a split within the administration.
Split, describe this now.
And so here, one of the major recommendations was to have what Secretary Powell described as an empowered quarterback, a new Director of National Intelligence. There's a funny story there, too, which Joe will tell. But to run and oversee the intelligence agencies, of which there were more than 20, scattered across the federal government. Well, Don Rumsfeld, who did not consider me a friend, he may have been Joe's friend, was absolutely opposed to the concept of a DNI, absolutely against it. So even though the president was for it, he, in my judgment, kept trying to undermine support for the
DNI,
concept.
Director of National Intelligence.
Director of National Intelligence, or, as Joe will tell you, do you want to tell the
I'll
story?
tell it real briefly. If I recall correctly, the commission, quite logically, in recommending this position, which was the most significant reform, called it the National Intelligence Director. And when we were working on it in Congress, I thought, you know, we always fall into acronym. This is going to be the NID, the NID. And it made me think of those little bugs that you get in your scalp. So I said, this is not right. Let's call it the Director of National Intelligence. This could be one of my great contributions to America. But
So you came up with the right name.
thank you. So I do want to say that when we went to the elections in 2004, this had not passed. It was not all worked out.
That's right.
After, very quickly, after 2004, basically President Bush called Don Rumsfeld and said, hey, Don, back off.
Yes.
We got to get this done. And Rumsfeld did.
Why do you think he did that?
You know, let me say, just follow up a little bit on that. Obviously, we in the commission were concerned when the thing wasn't moving as rapidly as we
I
hoped.
remember this, yeah.
Yeah, and particularly in the House with Duncan Hunter and that kind of thing. And so I had an idea.
And can I just interrupt to
Yeah.
say, we had already done our work,
Yes, that's right. yeah.
okay? We didn't just leave it.
I know.
These
know.
guys, Tom and Lee had spearheaded, you know, we're going to continue
I know.
even beyond our mandate to make sure this gets done.
It's like remedial
That's
work.
remarkable,
What I had heard,
unprecedented.
thank you, but what I'd heard is that Cheney wasn't being helpful.
Right.
Because he was close to Rumsfeld, close to the Feds
Right.
and all that. So I'd known Cheney for a long time, so I called up and asked to come see him. I hadn't talked to him in a while, but so of course he said yes, so I went over to his office. And I said, look, Mr. Vice President, this is something, you know, that the Republican leadership is for. The president is supported fully. The majority of Republicans in Congress are for. Isn't it going to be embarrassing if it doesn't pass with all that, plus which we have 60 or 80% or something of the American people with us?
Sure.
Right.
And isn't it going to be embarrassing to you and the president and the administration if this doesn't get through? He looked at me, sort of stroked his chin and said, I will try to be of help, but I don't leave fingerprints.
You're,
And that was his.
That's
and
great.
after
That's a
that, the
great
bill did
story.
start to move a bit.
Yeah.
you're getting a lot of inside stories today. But it really was difficult because of the turf battles, both within the bureaucracy and within the Congress to get this through. And the other important reform was the National Counterterrorism Center to bring together analysts from all the agencies so that the dots would be connected and the information would be shared, and we did not have the silos. But that meant that you were trampling on the jurisdiction of the committees that were responsible for these agencies. So when Joe and I brought the bill to the Senate floor, we had a flood of amendments. I think there were 300 filed, and including by chairs of all these powerful committees. And I remember well, Joe and I decided we were going to be in unison on every single one. And that was key to our success, so that it couldn't break down on partisan lines.
So you guys decided ahead of time, no matter what was,
We're going to oppose them all because we had a package, and it was really a good package.
I remember this, yeah.
And these were parochial amendments. Some of them, frankly, made some sense, but if one passed, the whole thing would unravel. We were worried, and it was too important. And our leaders stuck with us.
They did.
Friston Daschle did. That made a big difference. The only thing we didn't get done, of all the recommendations they made, needless to say, was the one recommending a reform in the way Congress handles Homeland Security, because we wanted to consolidate it in one committee, and that was the one that failed.
All I can say is there's only so much you can do. But in the end, our Senate vote was 96 to 2.
Yes, yeah.
And even the opposition was bipartisan. But boy, the conference was
Yeah.
really
Tough.
because of the opposition, as you mentioned, of Chairman Hunter, and DOD started ramping up again.
The conference would be when you took the Senate bill to the
Thank
House
you.
and you all sat
Yeah.
down and
negotiate.
Yeah, and talk to
And
each
it
other.
wasn't, I mean, we had great cooperation from Jane Harmon and Peter Hoekstra from the Intelligence Committee, who
Right.
were the our chief negotiators. And, but boy, behind the scenes, it was really tough.
let's talk about today. We only have a few minutes left. Are we safer, or where are the holes, or are there holes? Richard, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I have thoughts that transcend the work of the 9/11 Commission,
Sure.
that put us squarely in the present moment, where we have this level of partisan rancor throughout the country, with no leadership that over the last 4 years in the Trump administration, that was designed toward bringing America together. I must say, the political headwinds that we faced at the time of the 9/11 Commission's creation would be considered a light breeze compared to the partisan grip on this nation that we now face, where there is this absolute political resistance to accountability, and a tremendous threat that transcends anything that we have seen in my lifetime to the political process, to the very core of our democratic institutions. And we face that now, and we have to overcome it. And the good news is that throughout our history, there have been existential threats to our democracy from within. And we face that now, and we've seen that on January 6th, and we need to harness the kind of spirit, as we've said today, that was demonstrated by the Fetchits and hundreds of others who were actively working to change the mindset, to say to America, you can't be afraid of the facts. You must find the facts. You must find facts and then act on those facts as Americans, not as Democrats or Republicans, conservatives or liberals. And based on those facts, act in a way that makes sense for the preservation of our democracy. And we're at that moment now.
You know,
Governor Kane, yeah.
Yeah, look, I agree with everything Richard said, as usual. But I'd say, first of all, there is one hole left, and it is the Congress. You mentioned it before. Congressional oversight is still not what it should be. Right. And that one.
Hole in the reforms, you think?
Yeah, it's congressional oversight is very, very important in this whole business. If it's not working well, then we got a big hole, and we got a big hole. That's one thing. Secondly, Richard is absolutely right. I went to my doctor the other day, and he was talking about, he said, I'm really bothered. I'll mention it to you. I said, why? He said, because, he said, I'm a evangelical Christian. And he said, we believe very deeply in our faith. In my view, because of that, our family could not support Donald Trump. When we made that decision, my wife's family stopped talking to us. As a family now, we're totally disrupted. And we're all hurt by it. We don't know quite how to get back together. I mean, that's at a personal level what's happening, and that's transferred right up to the national level. And we've got to find a way to talk to each other individually as people in our communities, to get back that spirit that unites us, not divides us, and transfer that to our elected leaders. And one of the ways to do it, by the way, is to reestablish the center. We don't have many centrists left in the Congress in either party. We used to have a lot of them. We used to have Rockefeller Republicans, Blue Dog Democrats, and around those people often we made the compromises and got great legislation through. Those groups are now so small, they can't do that anymore. So we got to address all this. But if we're going to move forward as a country, as it was after 9/11, and which you were so much a part of as families, it's got to be together. It can't be separate. And we're going our separate courses, and if we don't turn around, this country's going to be in deeper trouble.
Senator?
Thanks, Mike. So let me just say, so bottom line, on the commission report and what Congress and President Bush did in enacting it, and what the families brought about, without them it wouldn't have happened, that we've been a safer country for 20 years. I mean, that's the bottom line to me. We've not had another 9/11 type attack, comprehensive as that. We've had some terrorist attacks. We've had some domestic terrorist attacks. but most terrorist attempts to attack the U.S. have been stopped in the last 20 years. And in my opinion, that wouldn't have been the case if the 9/11 reforms had not been adopted. So the very personal motivation that the Fetchits and all the other families brought to Congress and the White House during the consideration of the commission bill was realized, which is to protect other families, other Americans, from having to go through the tragedy that they went through. I just want to pick up quickly on what Richard and Tom have said, and it really, the story we've told today, we've been open, we've told some war stories, so to speak, legislative war stories. It wasn't easy to get this all done, but I mean, in the sense that there were partisan or defensive reactions, turf reactions to it, but ultimately everybody put the national interest ahead of parochial or partisan interest, and something really significant happened for the country. Now, in the last year and a half, we have had two events. You can't compare anything to 9/11, but we've had a pandemic which has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. We were clearly not ready for it. And then we had an insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. I mean, first time in our history where people tried violently to upset the results of an election, the rule of law. And both of these cried out for independent, nonpartisan commissions like the 9/11 Commission. And it just, there were attempts, but people kind of laughed at it. It's impossible. And the country suffers as a result. And the real tragedy here is, if you ask people the American people on public opinion polls, it may not be a majority, it's certainly a strong plurality, want us to work across party lines to solve problems, to make the country better. And the political system seems to be organized in a way, it's too long a topic, but where the extremes in both parties, the partisan extremes, dominate certainly the nominating process, and it makes it hard for what the majority or plurality want to happen. And we just, sooner than, than later, we need urgently to figure out how to fix this because, you know, America's heart and soul and future is on the line.
Senator Collins, you have the last word.
And let me say that I agree with all the comments that have been made and worked hard with Senator Menendez to create a commission to look at the pandemic.
Sure.
The legislation is still pending. I was successful in getting 8 Republicans to join me in supporting an independent commission to look at the January 6th riots at the Capitol, but that was not the 10 that we needed. I think had there not been so much partisanship, frankly, on the Democratic side, that I would have been able to get 2 more Republicans to join in that. But I want to end on a more somber note, and that is, I believe that the reforms have made us much safer, but that there are serious threats on the horizon. One is a cyber attack. And Joe and I were ahead of our time. In 2012, we proposed a cybersecurity bill that did not pass. Right now, I'm working with Senators Mark Warner and Marco Rubio on another cybersecurity bill. Think what happened with the Colonial Pipeline.
Right.
Well, quadruple that, or go 10 times that, if the electric grid were taken out in the Northeast in the winter. Cyber attacks are hard to attribute. They can be a nation state. They can be an international criminal cartel. They can be a brilliant but crazed individual. And I believe we are still extremely vulnerable to a cyber attack. And second, and I'm sorry to end on a controversial note, but I am very worried about Afghanistan once again becoming a safe haven for terrorists who will once again be able to plot against our country. And that is a tremendous challenge for us. So I'm sorry to end on a down note, but
I think it's a real note, and I want to thank you all, Richard, Governor King, Senator Collins, Senator Lieberman. Thank you so much for all this, your insight.
Once again, we agree.
About domestic terrorism. I mean, that's a concern for me because there is so much anger and hatred, here in our country. There was a lot of reference to the 9/11 family members. I was not on my own there, so I want to credit Beverly Eckert, Carol Ashley, Stephen Push in the early days, Carrie Lamack, Kristen Breitweiser, Patty Costanza, Lori Van Auken, Robin Weiner, Mindy Kleinberg, Bill Harvey, Monica Gabriel, and Sally Reaganhart. We, for many years, we left our family to, in fact, some people thought I wasn't married at that time. So when Frank showed up after the 5th year, they were surprised I really did have a husband.
There will be an editorial response.
That's right. Yeah. But I think that, you can see there's a lot of talk about, new blood in Washington and bringing people that have business backgrounds and all. I can't tell you, how much I respect these individuals here that are sitting on the panel. They're steeped in knowledge. I mean, no one could have done what Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins did. The thoughts of shifting that over to somebody else who wanted jurisdiction. Yeah, it's just unbelievable to me. And I, to have Governor Kane and Lee Hamilton and the commissioners continue to be out there talking about the important lessons that they learned, thinking outside the box on what we have to be concerned about in the coming years. And, truly, as I started, it was one of the most meaningful experiences in my life. I didn't know about politics as many of these other families didn't know, but we learned and we were guided really by Chris Shays and Carolyn Maloney, Tim Romer, Jane Harmon, and these wonderful people that were so kind and generous to come in today to present to you. So let's give them a round of applause.